Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews and to another review video here on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about R.J. Barker's Wounded Kingdom series. I'll be honest with you, I don't know when this video is going up. It will either be in about a year in the update for Overbooked, or I will put it out on a random Thursday at some point. But I really enjoyed this series and I wanted to get a review video filmed while it was still fresh in my mind. So for context, when I'm filming this is the 23rd of November. Some quick disclaimers before we start. All of the books in this series I bought myself. I got two of them secondhand, I think, in a charity shop, and one of them I bought in a sale. Regardless of where books come from, nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free and as humanly possible, though I'll still be talking about the series as a whole. If you do want to go into this knowing absolutely nothing, pause the video, go read the series, come back when you've read it. You might have to leave the tab open for a while. I'll also link the story graph for the series below in case you want to check out any user-generated content warnings. This is an adult fantasy series. It is R.J. Barker's debut fantasy series, and it originally came out with Age of Assassins in 2017, followed by the sequel Blood of Assassins, and finally we have King of Assassins, which came out in 2018. Why don't you want to stand up properly? What's going on? I have to lean you up. Lean. R.J. Barker is an author based in Leeds. He's also written the Tide Child series, which I've talked about infinite times on this channel. It's one of my absolute favourites, so I was really excited to go back and read his debut trilogy. Also, Justine had recommended this maybe 4 years ago, so I've had it on my radar since then. It's high fantasy, it's mystery, it's sword and sorcery. I would say the first book in particular really leans into the murder mystery aspect of things, but we'll come on to the plot in fact, right now. So, book one. Our young assassin main character, Girton, and his master, a female character, worth noting, they're in a castle, and they are there to catch the assassin who they believe has been sent to kill the crown prince. So the idea is, you've sent an assassin to catch an assassin. It's not a whodunit, it's a who's about to do it, or who has hired someone to do it, which is less catchy, so I understand why they don't call them that. The later books, I would say, very much still have that idea of solving a mystery, but they get much more into warfare than book one does, and also we have time jumps between each book. We still have Girton as our main character, but they build on the events of previous books, and also the shape of the world changes slightly as we go on. The biggest thing I noticed about this series that I would say is different or particularly unique is the way that R.J. Barker writes the fight scenes, which I know was very intentional. I think that's most evident in book one, which makes sense. I think with a debut book, you often see more of that, like, this is what I'm trying to sell the book on, and it's a lot of really interesting. It's connecting longer sentences with shorter phrases that imply the name of the move that the character is using, and it's really interesting reading R.J. Barker's note at the end where he talks about how he was trying to create this idea that half of the fighting was knowing what you were doing and half of it was acting on instinct and just using the moves that you'd trained to do, so thinking and acting instinctively. I think it doesn't always work in the books, but in book one in particular, I found it a really dynamic way of depicting a fighting style, and as someone who often gets very bored in combat scenes, it made it move very quickly, which I appreciated. So I think that's one of the more unique elements, and the other aspect I would say is the idea of a sword and sorcery mystery. I thought that worked, again, most well in book one. I think book one is the stronger of the three, but it is still, as somebody who loves a murder mystery and who loves the idea of a who is about to do it and figuring out mysteries from that, I thought that was a very enjoyable concept, especially because assassin books so often follow a very linear plot where we just, you're sent to kill someone and you kill them and maybe you have a moral dilemma about it at some point. Having an assassin who is trying to solve something and problem solve was really interesting as well. Pro number two, I really like the mentor character, Girton's master. I really liked their dynamic and their relationship, and I think had I not read Tide Child, I might have not necessarily had a different opinion, but I wouldn't have thought about it so hard, because obviously in Tide Child we have that similar older female character, younger man, mentor, maternal but not necessarily in the exact way that you might think kind of relationship. And I think R.J. Barker writes them really well. I'd be very interested to know what his maternal influences have been in his life, because I think they're probably some very cool women. I don't know that for sure, maybe he's writing wishfully. I think that relationship is probably one of my favourite things about all three books, and again, it's one of the things you lose more in the later books, or it changes. The way it's depicted changes a little bit, and I think that in book one I really enjoyed seeing their relationship. I like a mentoring, I like training, but you're not getting the full training montage experience, which I think we've read enough times in assassin books. Dear goodness me, we don't need to go to assassin school anymore. So getting to experience that ongoing training was really enjoyable as well. And it's just nice to have a character who listens to the women in his life, which is another thing I really liked about Tide Child, not to keep comparing the two, but the fact that it's not, ugh, you're so irritating, I'm going to go off and be a teenage boy or a young adult man. It's more about a relationship of respect and understanding, which is not something you see everywhere, so it works very well, and I think it's why R.J. Barker's writing of those relationships archetypes works really well. There's also some really good other world building elements in this story. We have the idea of mounts, which are not horses, they are like antlered big deer creatures, which I believe is why R.J. Barker's newsletter is something antler based. I assume that's the connection. I think that's really cool. There's some great ideas about politics and court intrigue in there, and also some very good moments that I think I would call grimdark. It's not a grimdark fantasy as such, but if you like that kind of darker, grittier, more gruesome fantasy, including depictions of executions, particularly in the later books, I would say it's well worth reading. There's some really truly questionable fantasy moments that made me think a lot about the grimdark author that I've read the most of, Joe Abercrombie. I think one of the reasons that the later books didn't work for me is I very much felt like it took Girton, well, didn't take Girton a long time to get over. Girton never really got over the events of book one. And yes, arguably that's intentional, but I think one of the great things about this book is we have the time jumps, so you don't necessarily have to do all of the emotional processing, and it just got a little bit unbelievable for me how fixated Girton would be on very specific things. And possibly that's me being uncharitable, and I shouldn't be mean to the poor assassin boy, but I did feel like maybe he should have something of a motivational change, or hold that event that happens that I can't spoil differently, and it really made me not like Girton as much by book 3, and maybe that was intentional, maybe that was something that R.J. Barker wanted to explore, that idea of holding on to your past, but for me it just felt a little bit like I was being anchored down in book 1, where I wanted to build into book 3 with a bit more freshness. I don't mind exploring the trauma of book 1 in book 2, but I think especially if you've got many years and a whole lot of different life changes in between the books, I want to move on. Not every book is an absolute winner. I think book 1 is super strong. Book 3 took me a lot longer to read, and it just didn't hit home as hard. I think possibly if I'd been doing them all by audiobook, so I'd had that like consistent pacing and not stopping and starting, which I did do a little bit with book 3, they might have felt more even, but overall I just felt like it dwindled a little bit towards the end, which isn't uncommon, especially with debut trilogies, where often book 1 is finished and then book 2 and 3 are finished with less time afterwards, if that makes sense. I can't think of any other good examples right now, but I know it has happened in the past. And kind of tied into that, this is obviously a debut, and I think particularly having read Tide Child before reading this, I can see where R.J. Barker's writing has developed and grown since writing this, so I can see the progression, and this therefore doesn't feel as amazing in comparison, but it's still a really good series. So yes, if you haven't already read Tide Child, I highly recommend picking that up. It is much more seafaring than this is, but it still brings me a great deal of joy. My wife is reading them right now, and I'm reliving them through her reading them. It's great. Highly recommend. I've recommended this fairly recently because I was talking about mystery fantasies when talking about... What was I talking about? I must have been talking about Winnowing Flame, I think. But City of Poison by Sam Hawke is another fantasy mystery that I bring up quite often. In terms of other things with assassins, I can't think of anything that I really want to recommend right now off the top of my head. I think I'm all right. So, should you read this trilogy? I would say, even though it's getting on a bit, even though R.J. Barker has grown as a writer since then, this is still a fantastic debut trilogy. As much as I've said they peter out towards the end, it's still a really solid series overall. It's just in comparison to book 1. I think they're great fun. I think if you like assassin books, if you want to explore that kind of teacher-student dynamic, I think that's really enjoyable. There's some great foreshadowing and dominoes toppling and all of those kind of politicsy things on top of these mysteries. It's a great read, would recommend. Have you read these? Do you have plans to? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media, come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all the ghosts on Patreon who support the channel and get early access to videos, bonus content and live streams. If you would like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much for watching whenever this goes up. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. It's gonna be some bloopers now. Today, hooray, that was what I was going for there.